It's happening.
Hola. Bienvenidos to the Black Flag Podcast. Today, we will debate borders and immigration. I am the unbiased moderator, Juan. I have no stake in this game. It does not matter to me. I love this country. I take your job. I love this country. Good work. I am just a normal citizen born in Minnesota. This is Sam Whiplinger.
Immigrant from South Dakota.
Sam's going to be arguing that borders should be open, along with our other co-host. We'll bring him in here.
Exit full screen. The bellboy.
Will Bell, welcome. Bienvenidos.
Hello, Juan.
It's Juan.
Juan.
See. And then arguing from the alt-right fashion, for the borders to be closed, so that me and my family have to be transported by a coyote. Dave Smith. Well, bienvenidos.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for having me. And that was the perfect introduction. I couldn't have asked for better.
I'm just going to be the unbiased moderator. That way, it's completely fair because you already have 2-on-1.
We could go 3-on-1, whatever you want. I know where your loyalties are, Juan.
I have to have to do my best to fake a Minnesota accent for the rest of the time here. All right. So one thing we're approaching this, I was thinking about listening to some other debates that you've had. What I'd like to get you guys to start by, I guess, defining what exactly you guys mean by open borders or closed borders, or just kind of define exactly what you mean from your standpoint. I don't know. How about Will? I'll let Will go first.
Right on. So generally, I think it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But in the context that we're talking about, like I would like to see is just a more open border, a less militarized border, and I know Dave does too, and I just would like to see us kind of like iron out what we as the Mises Caucus people want to push as far as immigration policy in the Libertarian Party and for the federal government. So like what I would like to see is just a rolling back of ICE and everything that come from the Department of, the
Will wants to roll back the state.
Yeah, exactly. That. And just generally like more open borders than any elected Democrat. That's what I want to see like the Libertarian Party stand for, but be able to articulate our argument not to where we're just not listening to the conservatives' grievances over it, but just explaining to where libertarian solutions could maybe answer them.
Well, we dropped out for a minute, but I just...
Oh.
Our stream dropped. We're back.
We're back.
It just
I heard all of that.
Right on. Okay, it was great.
We were saying how much we love you, Dave Smith.
So like Dave, what does open borders mean to you? Because like in the Spike Cohen debate, like you get it like open borders would be a disaster for our country, and I think you kind of probably are meaning something different than I was getting at.
Well, I mean, to me, it's a spectrum, right? But so open borders, I essentially think would mean there's zero restrictions. Like that would be the open borders would be basically the borders between New York and New Jersey. That's you can come and go, and there's absolutely nothing stopping you from coming and going. And closed borders would mean that you can't. Closed borders would be East Germany to West Germany in, when the Berlin Wall was still standing. And so I certainly am not a proponent of closed borders. My argument is that I don't think the libertarian position should be for open borders under current circumstances, at least that at least that's not the correct libertarian position. It would not work out very well, and I think that, as you kind of said, we should still listen to the conservatives' kind of critiques and things like that. I think that not only is it not the correct libertarian position, but as soon as you start to even say I'm for more open borders than the Democrats, you're just done talking to anybody on the right half of America. That alone wouldn't be enough of a reason for me to say we shouldn't take that position. But me thinking it's not the correct libertarian position and acknowledging how wildly unpopular it is, the combination of both of those is like, we really shouldn't be pushing these. So again, heroin being legal may not be a very popular position, but it is the correct libertarian position. I'm happy to die on that hill. That is the correct position. I think open borders is not the correct libertarian position, and it is about as wildly unpopular. It's not just wildly unpopular. It's like a death blow. It's almost like it in the same way as
legalizing fentanyl.
Well, no, I mean, look, that okay, fine, that is unpopular, but it's the correct position, and I could argue that. I could really argue why that is the correct position. Okay. I'm saying open government borders is not the correct libertarian position, and it is as unpopular as walking onto a liberal arts college campus and saying racism is good. It's about that level of unpopular.
I agree with that.
I was going to say, before I ask a question about that, Sam, did you want to jump in with something right away?
Yeah, so you mentioned heroin, or we could do fentanyl. That seems to be the big controversy now.
Right.
Why is it we can say, we're all paying taxes. So in a sense, you kind of view the entire country as like a community, and we get to decide who comes in and who goes out. So that in your...
we lost you again.
They're always having trouble with their internet. You can hear me though, right?
Yes, I hear you good.
Okay. So I guess what Sam's getting at is there's a lot of libertarian positions that are unpopular, like cutting the military to nothing or half or anything like that. People would cringe at anything along those lines, or legalizing fentanyl, or talking about legalizing prostitution. There are negatives for that, and I understand what you're saying about presenting more open borders, like just being hardcore on the open border. I'm not saying like a pure, we just have to abolish the border control. Absolutely. But
okay, so can we back up a little bit quick?
Sure.
We got our stream is dropping a couple times here, but I was going to say too, I think that we all agree, obviously, on the privatization of everything. We can all agree on that. Is
everyone here in ANCAP?
Yeah.
Okay.
You made us all ANCAP. So.
Thanks to you.
It's all your...
Very good. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
Exactly. It's very unpopular.
Well, that is true, but again, that's not what my argument is. It's not that it's unpopular; it's that it's wrong and unpopular.
Okay, so
would you say
I'm gonna enter the studio on my phone real quick, but I was just gonna say, so we all pay taxes, so we all get a say in what's in our community. That's your argument for who gets to be in our community, who isn't gets to be in our community. Well, if I'm understanding you correct.
Look, it's. Let me rant for a second, okay? And I'll try to keep this as short as possible. I really will. But then just so I can kind of try to because this is one of the tougher issues for me to kind of frame and for people to understand where I'm coming from. And I completely understand why there are libertarians who disagree with me on this and think the correct position is open borders. I felt that way for a long time. I'll just say this, okay?
Quickly before you rant. Similar to the Spike Cohen debate, you have to compliment us for at least 2 minutes of this rant before you actually make your point.
All right. Well, man.
And also, Will, can you add me to the stream on my phone?
Man, it was so genuine when I did it with Spike, but you guys are cool. I guess. I don't know. Oh, you
I'll
guys
take
cut
it.
out again. Oh, there it's all right, you're back. Okay, so I'd say that I think there's almost like when you're a libertarian, are they gonna try
You have to
back from their
click the.
phone?
I
Should
don't
wait?
know, man.
Should I wait for this to come together?
You do your rant. They'll be in the background the whole time. Like,
Well, I want them
hopefully
to
not
hear.
burning.
I want them to hear this as well, because I think it's a kind of important to set up, like what the whole, kind of like what we're debating about, or what we're talking about here, because this is an informal debate.
For sure.
But I don't know. Maybe let's give it a second and see if they're back. Can you guys hear us? No. All right, I guess not. All right, I concede. I'm wrong. Open the borders. What are we even doing here, man?
I don't know, man. I just wanted to call you out, just say something mean to you and have you come on the podcast.
What are you guys all in Minnesota?
No, I'm in Georgia.
You're in Georgia, and those guys are in Minnesota, right?
For sure.
Okay, cool.
And oh shit, it looks like it's just us two. We're still live,
All right, so I'll start it, and then maybe we could we can go over some of it when they come back. So all right, let's see how long you guys make it this time. All right, I didn't start yet, so here, have the backup. All right, just at least so you guys can hear me as I said.
Let's just go off my phone.
As you guys, are as we're all ANCAPs here, and essentially I'm an ANCAP because if you were to ask me what you think the proper foreign policy, of our government should be, it's like, well, there shouldn't be a foreign policy. And what should the economic policy be? There shouldn't be an economic policy. And likewise, what should the border policy be? There shouldn't be a border policy. It's I think that we should have a market, and that's what is the ideal way to organize society. I do think that there's almost like with this libertarian philosophy, which I love, I think about as much as anyone does. I became a libertarian I was introduced to the ideas in 2007, 2008, and it's been a huge force in my life ever since. I think that there's almost like there's like libertarianism 101, say, when you start libertarianism and you're in your intro to libertarianism phase and you're a freshman learning these ideas. And one of the problems, it's not exactly a flaw, but it's an issue that we have, is that there's something very seductive about libertarianism that offers people this kind of a feeling that they have the answer to everything. You have the answer to every single political question that anyone could ask you. I mean, as soon as you pass Libertarianism 101, Intro to Libertarianism, and you wrap your head around it, like you get a passing grade in that first course, you're like, okay, I know the answer to every political question that could ever be asked. Let's privatize it. Let the market handle it. Don't initiate violence against people. And that can be a little bit seductive for people to feel like they've figured out all the answers. And by the time you get to like advanced applied libertarian theory in a PhD course, it's like there's all of these little like nuanced areas where actually you didn't know everything in 101. And actually there's a lot more going on here. And I think that it's very easy for people in Libertarianism 101 to look at people who are making some of these arguments and go, you're not a real libertarian. You're contradicting libertarian principles. And believe me, I was there. I remember when I first came in contact with like late Rothbard and Lou Rockwell and Hans Hermann Hoppe writing about immigration. And I thought to myself, I was like, oh, this is such a deviation from libertarian principles. Like this is just not, and it wasn't until years later where I reread the stuff and started kind of, as I reread it, realizing, okay, maybe it's not a deviation. Okay, maybe they have a point. And then finally coming to a place where I was like, oh, they're just right about everything. And so I just kind of I recognize that the issue, as so many put it, is not that Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell and Murray Rothbard don't understand libertarianism. Like it's not actually the issue that they don't understand the basic principles. So one of the issues that I think people who are like in the Libertarian 101 category have is that what you immediately see is what the state does to people. And this is why I was for open borders for years, because we see what the state does to everybody, and it's horrible. And we don't want the state doing anything to anybody. And you see right away what the state does to, what they do when they fight wars, or what they do when they lock people up for bullshit crimes, or what they do when they destroy businesses, or any of this stuff. I think the other end of it, what you realize the more you engage with these ideas, is what the state does when it, like that sometimes when the state doesn't do anything, it's doing something to people as long as the state exists. So for example, if the, okay, this is kind of a tired example, but it's one of the ones that people use. And I think it kind of illustrates the point that we may all believe that people shouldn't be in jail for like bullshit crimes, people in jail for drugs, or in jail for gun possession, or in jail for tax evasion, or in jail for insider trading, or on any of these like crimes that are just made up nonsense crimes. But once they're in jail, they are fed by the government. And if you were to be jailed and not fed, like if you kidnap someone and lock them in your basement and don't feed them and they starve to death, you're a murderer. Now, you could say in a sense, you'd be like, well, do you want to immediately abolish the government program that is killing prisoners, or that is feeding prisoners? It's like, well, no, actually, we're not going to abolish that until we first abolish like locking them up for bullshit reasons. And likewise, if you could imagine, say like, say you had like imagine, since we're all ANCAPs here, imagine the anarcho-capitalist model on whatever level you want to. Make it like a small level. Make it one city block. One city block is an anarcho-capitalist model. And so instead, say you rent an apartment, instead of renting the apartment from the guy who owns the building, you're renting the apartment from the guy who owns the building, but he also owns the street outside the building. Like there's a private street. And imagine if any, like, say, schizophrenic, drug addict, homeless person wanted to come just camp out on the street. He's like, I'm going to live here. I'm going to piss here. This is my toilet and home now. We all know what would happen with 100% certainty. That person would be removed. There's no other option. Like that's what would happen. And you can't imagine any private piece of property in the world where it's just acceptable that someone could come and make it their toilet and home.
So Dave, not to interrupt you, man, but sure. We're all big fans. We listen to your podcast all the time, and I think everybody on this here's heard that argument, and I see what you're saying, like for private things, and I get where you're going.
Well, okay, but let me just hold on. But let me just finish the point for the sake of the podcast, so like we can kind of establish this. I'm just saying that if we know that we would be allowed to exclude people on private property, but so my point is just that if the government came and took over the street, a gang called the government comes and takes over the street and says all we're going to do now is not exclude people from turning this into their home and toilet, then that's still doing something to people, even by not doing anything. And so that's more or less like the argument that it's not that when you have the dynamic of public property, it's you have an issue where how it should be maintained. What's preferable? I mean, you guys tell me what's preferable in that situation for if the government is going to be there. Like, obviously, the correct solution is for the government to get the hell out of the way and not exist anymore. But if they're going to be there, should they allow whoever to come and just live on the streets? Or would it be preferable to say, like, we'd rather this be handled at least in some way closer to how we all are advocating that it would be handled in our ideal society? So, okay, sorry. I'm sure you've heard this before, but just to like kind of set it up, that's at least the start, I'd say.
Perfect. Yeah, that's awesome. So what I would say is 2 points. So one is, people always say, what should government do? Like, should the government stop a child rapist? It's like, well, yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of like asking, say there's a fire and there's, for example, Derek, whose house burned down in a fire.
Thank you.
But let's just say there's a house on fire and right next to the house is a pond full of water. Should the water flow uphill and spray out and put out the fire? It's like, yes, it should. Will it? No, it's not within its nature. And when you talk about like, should a community be able to choose who is in the community or not based on like, populism, like they should all have a say. We're all paying taxes. I can kind of understand that if you're talking about, like a family or like a small community. But I don't think the United States of America with 330 million people is a community. I think it's a bunch of communities, and I think it's a bunch of people. It's the same reason, communalism kind of works, but communism just absolutely does not work.
Right.
And I think I had one other point.
Well,
the other point is too, when you look at, we're all paying taxes, we're all, you think we have a bigger claim to what we're paying taxes for like these public properties and stuff, but we're also like, bombing other parts of the world. We're also like overthrowing other governments. We're also, we're the empire of the world. We're threatening basically every other nation. We're the biggest bully. So I think like I just bought a car from a guy from Iraq who was, swearing up a storm about George W. Bush. It was music to my ears, but it was like, don't you think we, it's like, don't you think we owe him something just as much as like the government took a lot from that guy, just as much as it took from me, probably more. Like he has a scar from ISIS and stuff like that. So that's kind of my concern. It's all philosophically based, and it's just it's hard for me. I'll just finish this, but it's just hard for me to think of like, just like the libertarian stance shouldn't be like, hey, sex or what is it, the libertine is good, it's just hard for me to listen to someone sort of have more of a milquetoast take on immigration when it's like, I don't know, like I see, kids in cages, I see ICE, think of all the money we're spending on just the war on immigration. And I think it's appalling.
Yeah. So, but I mean, look, you can just to be clear, I don't think I'm having a milquetoast take on this at all. And you can to look at like something like kids in cages or like the most horrific example. I mean, look, you can think that murderers should be prosecuted, like murderers should be arrested and have a day in trial and all that, and still think that if the cops showed up to like after someone murdered someone and they just like, I don't know, like beat him with a baton for 25 minutes, be like, whoa, that's like way out of control. So yeah, I mean, like I don't have to like support every excess in border patrol to say that I don't support open borders. I think your point that is it true that people in Iraq, you could argue, have a greater claim against who's been victimized by the government than most people in America? Sure. I mean, my taxes are way too high, but they haven't done anything to me like they've done to those people. The inherent problem with government is that, or it's one of the worst problems with government is that it's like, what the fuck does a claim even mean? Like, who do you have a claim against? You have a claim against the government? Okay. It's not like what is the government? It's not like they're going to go take the McCain's family's money away from them. It's not like they're going to go take like the Pelosi's money away from them. They're what? Going to take the taxpayers' money? So you punish the people who really had nothing to do with that, for at least the vast majority of them. The point isn't necessarily like, of course, the government's going to do a bad job with anything it does. But to say like the argument is that the government controlling the border, and not just the border. It's like the government controls the border and controls every road that leads right up to the doorstep of every citizen, pretty much. And to say that we're going to make that all wide open, and on top of that, we're going to have anti-discrimination laws, and we're going to have, you're basically going to have this system where the domestic population is robbed, extorted at the threat of imprisonment and just in perpetuity. And then you're going to have open everything up to your doorstep. And now someone who comes to this country who was not in, no one invited them. No one, they just wander over here, say in like a big caravan of 100,000 people.
I'll invite them all.
Right? Well, right. But that doesn't really mean anything. Like that's to just say I'll invite them all isn't anything. Okay. Are they all coming to your house? Like, this is one of the things libertarian. This is kind of what I get. There's this.
Well, that's kind of why.
Well, let me just make this point. There's this thing that a lot of libertarians get. This is kind of what I meant. So it's like the seen versus the unseen. There's like that you see what the government does to people, but then there's also this flip side of what the government does to people when they don't do anything. Like, so we see what the cops do when they're cracking their baton over someone's head, and it's horrific and it's wrong. But like, if you live in a major city today, what you might also notice is that there's this flip side to that, which is also what the government doesn't do. Like, they monopolize your security force, and they do a terrible job of actually controlling violent criminals. So, like, they're running the monopoly, and that's also something. Like, we could all imagine that if the government tomorrow just said, we're going to stop prosecuting violent criminals, that wouldn't just be like, oh, great, libertarianism, we rolled back the state. That would kind of be like, oh no, they're doing something to these people now who have no way of defending themselves. So it's like, yes, I get this a lot with people who give me pushback, libertarians who give me pushback about the immigration stuff, where they go be like, well, hey, if I want to invite someone to my property, like, who has the right to stop me from doing that? And it's like, yeah, correct. That's the correct libertarian answer. However, there's also the flip side to that, that like, you're not inviting anyone onto your property. You're not. You're just saying that and then supporting a policy where well, maybe you're inviting one person or something like that. But I'm saying, like, you're supporting a policy where the immigrants who are coming in are going to immediately have, under current circumstances, have access to public roads, the police, public schools, emergency rooms, public transit, like all of these things that a lot of people
too.
Well, but that a lot of people were forced to pay for. And I'm just saying, like, in that situation, shouldn't those people who were forced to pay for it get some say in the matter? And if you're listening to what their say is not that we want open borders. So it presents this kind of complex problem for libertarians to deal with.
And I'm all for us, like, talking about the complexity of this issue. I would like us to try to steer away from the philosophical, like, open borders versus closed borders, because it leads to this conversation like it's just kind of unending. But like, Dave, for you, like, what would you like the federal government, like, if we were to nominate you as the Libertarian presidential candidate, and you were up there advocating what you wanted the federal government to do about immigration right now, would you advocate less border control than we have now, or more?
Well, what I would advocate for is okay. So in terms of direct like border patrol, I'd advocate for the federal government getting completely out of it and leaving it to the states. And so I think, like, as much decentralization in border control as we could have is the closest proximity that we could have to, like, what we're looking for, which is anarcho-capitalism, right? But what I would do is kind of empower the states to do whatever they want to do. What I would advocate for is, first and foremost, turning it into an issue on the things that libertarians can all agree on. So ending the war on drugs is the most important immigration policy that I think is completely consistent with libertarianism and would actually make a huge difference in all of this. I mean, the biggest issue with immigration right now is a mix of the fact that we, through our war on drugs and through the DEA's involvement in South America, we prop up cartels, create these civil wars in South American countries, which creates the conditions that lead to so much of the mass migration. And then, of course, the big issue is that there's all this drug smuggling and trafficking coming up through the border, and you put all of that out of business immediately if you just legalize all drugs. Okay, so that would be from at least the federal level, that would be the most important thing to do. And then, just end all of the involvement in Mexico and in other South American countries, end all of it like that. Like, these are the steps that I think libertarians should be loudly, like, advocating. But I certainly would not say just rip the border wide open. You know how there's this humongous crisis of what are we getting? Over 1 million legal immigrants a year coming in, plus 200,000 every month. We're going to announce to the world that the borders are open under current situations. I mean, like, this is just.
I don't necessarily see that as a crisis of just.
Okay, so I just want to say too, because these are points that most of us all agree on, anyways, like almost 100% on what the causes are, what the ultimate solution is. So this is what I think I'm wondering too, even the basis of the argument, because Will, you were asking Dave Smith about his potential run for president, which I honestly thought we were all on board for Justin Amash. I don't know what we're talking about Dave Smith for, but
I'm a big Amash guy myself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But no, he just won't announce.
There we go.
Sorry, what were you saying? Oh, you guys are
Did y'all cut out again? Damn it.
We're still here.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think the argument that we're talking about is more of what the libertarian position is to advocate for, because we can go down these philosophical autistic spectrum conversations all day long, conclusions, blah blah blah.
We're definitely going to go through more philosophic, because I get my half an hour and then Will gets his half.
No, that's totally fine. I'm just saying, my point is the argument, my question is the argument what the libertarian position is, because I think that lends to who our advocates are for in our movement, that people from outside the movement see. People from outside the movement aren't seeing me. People from the outside of the movement are seeing Dave. They're seeing Spike. And then they're hearing, open border, more of a controlled border. Is that what the argument is what the libertarian soapbox position should be? Is that what we're arguing?
I would say my position on that, and I said something about this the other day on Twitter, my position on what the official Libertarian Party position should be is, I think much like the abortion question, I think there should be no immigration, official position. I just think that if you look at the libertarian literature and if you look at the libertarian movement, there is a huge divide amongst, if you have an issue where you have Murray Rothbard on two different sides of the issue. Ooh. If you have Murray Rothbard on two different sides of the issue, and you have Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell and Hans Hermann Hoppe on one side, and you have David Friedman and what's his name? God damn it! Sorry,
the Black Slate podcast.
Yes, exactly. You guys and all of these people on the other side of the issue. I mean, you could at least say there's no consensus here over what the correct libertarian position is. And just look, I'm pretty adamantly pro-life, but I can recognize that there's good faith libertarian arguments on the pro-choice side. So I wasn't advocating that we should replace the pro-life or the pro-choice plank with a pro-life plank. It's just we shouldn't have a pro-choice plank, because obviously there's a libertarian argument on the other side. So I don't necessarily. I think the official Libertarian Party position almost shouldn't exist, and then libertarians can argue their case for why they feel this is the correct libertarian position or that's the correct libertarian position. So I'm just making the argument that I don't think it's the correct libertarian position to say we have open borders. And I also I think that if you are I recognize I'm talking about the philosophy of this right now, and we can get into the practicality too, but if you are going to say what I used to say, that open borders are the correct position because there's even in on government property, there should be no restrictions, and that property should be equally owned by everyone in the world. And so if you're opposing the idea that the people who the money was stolen from to create this shouldn't have any more of a say than anyone else, it's okay, but that's a lot of times people go as you guys already kind of started going down this path, you go, okay, but wouldn't your line of logic lead to justifying all of these other government impositions, which is fair enough. But the flip side to that is that the other line of logic would lead to a lot of craziness. So we can both kind of reducto absurdum this point. And then the only almost reasonable place to land is that there are going to be some restrictions on the property that government claims to own that none of us believe government legitimately owns, but they are exercising control over. I don't think anyone here would actually argue that on all government property there can be absolutely no restrictions for anyone in the world. Maybe I'm wrong,
and none of us are we feel you on that philosophical point.
I guess this kind of leads to my earlier point where there's I'm I have a family, I have a wife and kids. We're in a communist relationship. You know, I know like the Hutterites, the Amish, they have like little communes and stuff like that. Like if like a little commune said, you know, we don't want any black people, you know, in our commune, I'd support that because it's like it's a small community.
Freedom of, yep.
Yeah, but if like the entire nation said, you know what, we're all paying taxes, blah blah blah, this and that, you know, we're gonna deport all black people, I'd be like, well, that's totalitarianism. That's insane. Or like if we're gonna put a wall up and we're, you know, not gonna allow any black people. The other thing is like getting back to my earlier point that we cut out, I think, was like the fentanyl point, where it's like you make all these arguments, like we're all putting into the system, we're all paying taxes, we all kind of get a say on like what happens. Like if it's our tax burden, well, couldn't you make the same argument for, you know, for, you know, people making fentanyl illegal? Like that's not popular at all. And
well,
like
okay,
it's
so
costing lots of lives and all this stuff. And
okay, so there's a few really important distinctions here, right? So if you, let's say you were to say to your point that whatever, like the majority of taxpayers or something like that said that we want to deport all black people.
Right.
Well, one of the major issues you'd have there is, at least from the libertarian perspective, is that there's like, I mean, aside from just like the stupidity of it and like the moral outrage of it, but just strictly from
honestly, I don't think it's that bad of an idea. I mean, I'm open to consider. I'm open to
just like practically, how would we implement this? Is my question. Would you go, well, what you're talking about, people who are, first off, they own themselves. They own their property. You would have to be like violating people's like property rights and natural rights in order to do this.
Well, they just can't use public property. Let's do that.
Okay, fine. But if you, again, so, well, let me just finish this and then I'll address that point. I promise. So that would be a whole different thing to say like, okay, we're going to like, remove the, like all of these people from their own homes or from, take and forcibly take their persons away from them. It's different to say that someone cannot move onto property that doesn't belong to them. See, that in essence is completely consistent with libertarian principles. Now, of course, obviously, when the government's involved, these things are murky and it's not perfect. The only perfect solution, or the closest approximation to that, is to have the government not exist. And we want to work toward that end goal. But it's very different to say, oh, if there's a caravan of 100,000 people walking up to the United States of America and no one's invited them, to go, nope, you're not welcome here, is very different than ripping people out of their homes and deporting them. Like from a libertarian perspective, that's very different. In terms of the question with, well, let me just address every point you made real quick. In terms of the question with fentanyl, look, my argument is basically that you can reducto absurdum either one of the positions here to a ridiculous point. So it's like, where is there a reasonable application of this principle? Would it be like if the government said that, like that, hey, you can't smoke meth in government buildings? Like, okay, I don't know that any of us would think that's that crazy. And like, hey, if you come into a government building,
that's how I became a libertarian.
Well, if you're smoking meth on a private sidewalk, we are going to ask you to leave, or we're going to force you to leave. That to me isn't that crazy. If they say we're going to beat you over the head with a club and lock you in a cage, that to me is over the line. But at the same time, like, you know what I mean? So it's almost like that's the like where you find like what is the reasonable application of this principle. And here I could get more into it, but go ahead. I'm sure we will.
One more question. You're talking about,
sure.
So you've used the example before, like say a public school want a hobo in like the girls' locker room. Even though it's public property, you're saying like not everyone has access to it or should have access to it. And that's normal. And you kind of appeal to like popularity. But in my opinion, like we should base this off of like what, and we don't know the perfect answer. We can never know the perfect answer until we actually have in Capistan. But like, what would a free market society look like? In a free market society, we would still have schools. They would still have like rules, like there wouldn't be homeless people in the girls' locker room. So to me, it's like, you have to base it off of what would a free society look like.
Exactly.
And I think in Ancapistan, it's hard for me. I can imagine like borders around like communities. I can't really imagine in Ancapistan, like every single person along the border is just going to be like, no, I'm going to put up a wall and put up lots of security and make sure like we decide who comes in and out of this country of 330 million people.
It is billion, by the way. You're correct.
Yeah, billion.
Well, okay, right. So I completely agree with your idea of like, it's kind of like we can almost approximate what a libertarian society would look like. And if we're closer to that, then that's better. That's better than what we have. So I would say this. If you have look, probably we wouldn't have a country of 330 million people. And we wouldn't right now. What exactly would be the nation? I don't know, not like the state, but just the nation. That's very hard to say. But if you had a society where, say, I don't know, it's hard to find the best opinion polls on this stuff, but it's something like 90% of people are opposed to open borders.
Make it 100.
Well, right. So make it 100. And what is that amongst property owners?
I bet 90% of people are against us, like just libertarians.
Yes.
But
that's not sure. Sure, but that's not exactly the point we're making here. But if you're saying within a libertarian society, if you had 90% of people opposed to open borders, you wouldn't have open borders. Like you wouldn't have open borders, at least. You certainly wouldn't have a system where the borders are open and any immigrant can come in here immediately. And if they have a kid, they have birthright citizenship. They have immediate access to all public roads, all hospitals, all public schools, all all of this stuff. So that certainly wouldn't be what it would look like. And I think that while there are some, and just one more philosophic point on this, and we can get into all of the specifics, but I remember, okay, I had this this exchange with what's his name? Chase. I can't remember his last
Oliver?
name. Yes, Chase Oliver, who ran for Senate in South Carolina, I believe.
Georgia. He's one of them.
Georgia. I'm sorry. My mistake. In Georgia. I apologize. And I did know that. I apologize. And he so he's not a fan of mine, which is fine.
We are though.
And he's I don't have anything against the guy or anything, but I know he's not like a big fan of mine. But
he's not a fan of me either. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. So me and him had an exchange, and I thought this was kind of interesting to me. That I remember it. So it was like when I was taking the position, the radical position, that is only a radical position. It's only a controversial position amongst libertarians, but I was taking the position which is really the same as the border argument, that schizophrenic, homeless, drug addicts should be removed from playgrounds where little kids are, and the
so unreasonable.
Yes, I know.
I don't understand. How am I supposed to be able to take my kids to the park on the weekend?
Exactly. My point is, you shouldn't be able to. That's okay.
Homeless rights are human rights.
So I was talking about this, and this was the radical position that I took, right? So, and he said something. I think he called me. He goes, Dave's Judge Dredd, because he wants to like execute homeless people or something like this. And I kind of like, he said something to me. He goes, libertarians, real libertarians, believe that we don't use the state against nonviolent people. Like we don't initiate force from the state against nonviolent people or something along these lines. It's an old Twitter exchange. I'm not getting this exactly right, but I remember there was this, I was like, okay, all right, cool. So I get it. You want to play Libertarianism 101. Well, like I'm pretty good at Libertarianism 101. I got a really good grade in that class. So let's play this game. And I said to him, I go, let me ask you, Chase, do you support the cops? Do you support police arresting violent criminals, rapists and murderers, etc.? And he said to me, yes, but I believe that people are innocent until proven guilty. And I believe that, they have a right to a fair trial and, have representation and all this, whatever, something typical like that. And I said, okay, cool. So in my mind, I'm like, let's play Libertarianism 101. So you support a criminal organization known as the police, who are funded through violent extortion at the threat of ripping people out of their homes and throwing them in cages. That's how they get their money, who on a daily basis just violate people's rights in the most egregious way. You know, harass people, threaten them. I mean, imagine if you just, pulled up guns drawn around someone's car and made them stop on the highway. They kidnap them, sometimes just for the day until the morning. Sometimes they kidnap them for months at a time. And by the way, you're supporting them kidnapping what you define as innocent people. Because they're innocent until they've been proven guilty. Even a murderer, right, is innocent until he's been proven guilty. You support them kidnapping them for months at a time and torturing them until they appear in front of a government court, also funded through violent extortion. You know what I mean? And then they give some verdict, and then it's okay to lock them up for the rest of their life. So I'm like, okay, are you Judge Dredd? Like, are you, and the point I'm just trying to make, and he did not get the point I was making at all. It's fine. But the point I'm making is that, yeah, that ain't too libertarian either, by the way. Like, if you support even like murderers and rapists being, prosecuted, it's not very libertarian. But I think we could all recognize that, like, look, under the current circumstance, that can't be the first thing we libertarianize. You know what I mean? Like, you can't start with the government doesn't feed prisoners. You can't start with the government doesn't prosecute murderers, because until we have systems in place to take care of these issues, it's just going to be such a disaster to start there. And I feel the same way about opening the border, that it's like the boundaries around a nation state are probably the last thing that should be removed. The idea that they're the first thing, that we still have everything else we have today, and we just remove those first, is going to be madness. And so again, that's just my point. Like, if you agree that we should still, under current circumstances, you don't want to legalize murder, okay. But you're also then saying that doesn't make you like a coppertarian, in the same way that people call me like a bordertarian. It just means that you're like, well, look, there's got to be some order in which things are abolished, and this one can't be the first one. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, man. And I'm with you there. I just want to this argument, like, I don't think you're a bordertarian. But you're the dude that, like, I showed up at Reno to like get the Mises Caucus and stuff. Like, you're the dude that we all kind of want to see represent us and stuff. I know, like, policy wise, you and me and even Chase Oliver probably agree, on 99% of it. Like, yeah. It's really like, it's just we really, when we get past the philosophy, we're arguing about semantics. Well, I think that's right. And like, I'm very like anti-semantics. Like,
hold on a second before we get into semantics. I've been a very poor
anti-semantics.
I've been a very poor moderator this whole time. So if we're going to get away from the philosophy,
you are philosophical.
Yeah.
All right. Let's say this right here at the 48-minute mark. Philosophy point done.
We're all going to say. I said what I had to say. I was going to ask anything else.
Fair and square.
Okay. Yeah. Sam won round one.
One for the Black Flag podcast.
And then go ahead, Will Bell. But I do want to ask a question. I do have a question for Dave when you're done here, Will.
Sure, Dave. Like, back to kind of like where I asked you earlier about like what you wanted to like present to the American people as the libertarian candidate. And you're saying like you want to abolish ICE, you want to decentralize border control, at least down to the states, all that kind of stuff. And I'm down with that. And I think every libertarian that is kind of like on the other side of the argument that we are agree with us, but we're getting bogged down in this philosophy debate. So like even past, like, abolishing ICE is more open borders than any Democrat elected. Them motherfuckers are funding that border and the totalitarian system that is in place, controlling the border around America. Like, I think we should be advocating for drastically, it's not like the first thing we don't open up the doors and go, we're open borders now. And also every Mexican or anybody that walks into America is an automatic citizen with, you know, benefits and stuff. Like, let's find a ways that we can cut down government intervention in the free passage of people. Like when we do abolish the war on drugs, and maybe Mexico abolishes their war on guns, we can get back to a point like where our parents had, where they could drive to Mexico and go on vacation and shit. Like that's kind of where I want to be pushing us to all be pushing.
That would be ideal, no question about it. But I also think that like the world we're living in right now, and what libertarians always have to do, if we want to have any chance at this, right? Like if we want to have any chance of like really having a moment and really connecting with people in the same way that that in the same way that like why Ron Paul had such a big moment in 2008 and then in 2012 was not because he was speaking to Americans about, you know, hey guys, I've got this theory that's the non-aggression principle, and it's really beautiful and wonderful. As much as all of us love that, you know, and like I love it more than anyone, but the reason he connected so much is because he was like, look, you're fighting this war in Iraq. Here's what actually caused it. Here's what's actually going on. Here's what's actually the solution. Hey, there's this financial crisis. Here's what actually caused it. Here's what's going on. Here's the solution. He was speaking to like the crises that they were facing. And right now, one of these crises is like, and I know you disagreed with me on this, but it is that like people are flooding over by the hundreds of thousands per month. And a lot of the people in this country like don't want that. It is permanently changing this country in a drastic way. And so, and look, again, this is one I highly recommend everyone here go read if you haven't already read Murray Rothbard's article, Nations by Consent. In it, he talks about how Stalin was flooding Estonia with ethnic Russians. And he wasn't doing this because he wanted to enrich them with diversity. He was doing this because this would destroy the nationalist bonds. He knew it was a very smart plan. By the way, those nationalist bonds are what ultimately brought down the Soviet Union. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like and the fact that like libertarians got to kind of wake up to this idea that like the fact that all of the worst people are promoting this and doing everything they can to fuel this kind of migrant crisis. They're not doing it because they love diversity as they claim. They're doing it for the same reasons. And so, look, I'm all for decentralizing this stuff, but at the same time, I think it's very possible when you decentralize it that there's going to be a lot of these communities who are like, that's it. No more. Like we've had enough for now. We can't tolerate anymore. Look, even the other day, the mayor of New York City was saying it's unfair for New York City to have to deal with all of these migrants. But like little towns in Texas and Arizona are supposed to deal with it. It's so again, I'm not like
I think our culture can take it. Like I think we can take the Mexicans coming across.
I was going to make the opposite point, which is like our culture kind of sucks. You know, like we're arguing about, you know, what is a woman? If you watch that clip, like he goes to like this other country and he asks them what is a woman, and they're just able to answer him. Or you'll see the guy, he'll dress up like a Mexican and ask a bunch of people what they think of his goofy costume, and they're like, well, you're kind of appropriating Mexican culture.
Yeah, our culture sucks. Our culture sucks. There's no question about that. Our culture sucks when you go to college campuses and ask kids about these ridiculous questions. Our culture is also kind of like, I don't know, the like very nice like neighborhood that I live in where it's all just kind of like parents raising their families and being really good. Yeah. And there's like I don't know, there's a lot of people like you know, you think our culture sucks? Like let's have a really brutally honest conversation. Do you think our culture sucks compared to Honduras?
No, but
you know, like does our culture suck compared to compare to South America or Africa or something like that, and go drop yourself in a random culture? Is our like if you had to go have your kid live in one of these cultures, Does our culture suck compared to theirs? I mean, like, I'm not disagreeing with you. Like, our
Yeah,
culture
you're making a
does
fair
suck,
point.
but let's be real. Let's be
I don't
honest
want-
about
I'm
this.
not like trying to get on the our culture suck like a little bit.
That was
But, like,
me.
for sure. Like I
I'm
think
just responding to what
the American culture, like what we have as far as like, I know this gets eye rolling and this sounds very blue pilled libertarian, but like the shining, you know, like we are the country that the immigrants come to and make something of themselves and all that kind of stuff. And we are a country made up of a bunch of different cultures. Now, that's us rednecks down here in Georgia, y'all up there in New York and Jersey, Minnesota, and there's, you know, a lot of Hispanic Americans running around here and stuff, and Mexicans living here illegally. Like I'm a farmer. We've always had relationships with like Hispanic communities that are like migrant communities that would come through and pick blueberries for us and stuff like that. And there has been a harsh change between like what used to be, where it wasn't necessarily like, you know, there were people in our communities that hated when Mexicans would come into town to pick fruit for farms like mine, and then they would basically like start in Florida and work their way up, you know, to Maine as, you know, fruit crops would come in. And we would negotiate with Mexicans that would speak English, and they would do work that we wanted to do. And it all worked out. Human action, as far as like that culture and our culture, worked out. And then during the Bush era, and more so in the Obama era, and then even so way more in the Trump era, the federal government has started getting involved in like micromanaging farms and just people that want to work immigrant labor, not because of like paying them cheaper. We paid them. They would pay the pay that we pay Mexican labor. They would pay their taxes as far as like Social Security with fake numbers and stuff, pay into the system that they would never benefit from. The American, you know, collective is benefiting off of that kind of stuff. But now we have to set ourselves up. Well, no, we're not, of course, like when we get down, but I'm just saying, like, when we're talking about like if they're a drain or a benefit to society. And now, like, the federal government has it where we are micromanaged by them. We have to set ourselves up through the federal H-2A programs with migrant workers that they select, bring over here. We don't do it. Like my farm, we stopped, and, you know, we're just kind of like going more to machine picking and trying to like, we're stuck working with high schoolers and meth monkeys now. But what most farmers that are bigger than me are now doing are like, they're setting themselves up and they have to house and take care of these people. And they're basically like kind of like little slave masters, that if these people, it sets up a weird relationship with the farmer and the migrant picker. And really everybody's getting cut out from like what we pay them and what they get, and the federal government's getting more money. It's all a sham. We're all tax cows. And
well, yeah, I agree. I agree with all of that. And I think that, you know, I think there's no question from the economic point of view that, yeah, like free people just freely associating with each other is what's going to produce the best economic benefits from the most people. And the government getting involved just ruins everything. And they screw you coming or going, in the same way that like the Federal Reserve, like if their rates are too low or too high, they're still screwing you because they're not the correct market rates. And in the same sense, it's like, if immigrants are just benefiting off, you know, taxpayer dollars in some way, like whether it's through emergency rooms or public schools or anything like that, well, then that's screwing the American taxpayer. And if they're paying money into the federal government, well, then Jesus, I mean, we're libertarians. The last thing we want to see is them funding the worst criminal gang in the world. So it's all kind of like, yeah, it's all of it's bad because the government's involved in like running this whole operation. But the question really is, what is the correct libertarian position? And the correct libertarian position is that all interactions should be voluntary. And if there's people who are coming here because they have like voluntary interactions, then okay, fine. But the reality of the situation is that there's lots of people just coming here who were uninvited. Nobody asked for that, and they come here and the domestic population is forced to subsidize them, and that's not very libertarian.
So
it's not libertarian either way. When you have government borders, no matter how open or closed they are, it's not going to be a great libertarian solution. The answer is going to be probably somewhere in the middle.
So the answer, the big answer here.
Hold up, Will. I gotta say, as your unbiased moderator, as racist as that sounded, Dave, Santa, do you have a point? I'm joking, by the way. I actually lean towards your perspective, Dave. Which I also was going to say after, if you want to make a point here, I did want to say, Dave, after Sam and Will make a couple points here, could you maybe think of a couple of questions to ask them, to push them, so I can maybe hear more of their perspective? Because I've heard yours, and I kind of lean your way. I'm curious what these guys do have to say a little bit more about those.
What if, Dave, I said every time you hugged your wife, or the government gave you $1,000? Does that mean that I would have a say in whether or not you hugged your wife, if that makes sense? Because I'm trying to remember back to what was your earlier point? You were just making a point that
I interrupted you.
You interrupted me.
Yeah, let's make note that I forgot what I was gonna say, and both of you fuckers fucking interrupted me to meander into a goddamn pointless
moderator.
What the fuck, guys?
I thought that was my job.
It is. Yes, thank you, Dave.
You're doing.
I forgot my point was going to make Dave.
We're paying you $1 an hour. We expect more.
And the liberty movement was going to unite over this, and you fellas.
Well, I got a question.
Hold on, wait. So if the government paid me $1,000 every time I hugged my wife,
I had a point to that.
Would you not hug your wife, Dave? Fuck, Sam.
Because you were. I cannot remember your earlier point. I'm sorry.
Well, I'd say for me personally, I probably wouldn't take the $1,000. But if it was somebody else who would take the money every time, by the way, oh man, if I got $1,000 every time I hugged my wife, I'd be loaded. I could make so much money.
You were making the argument that immigrants come here and the taxpayers have to subsidize them with all sorts of different things. And my point is, it's not the immigrant's fault. That's not. If that makes a sense.
Yeah, you can't put the consequence.
You can't.
Well, I agree. I agree. It's not the immigrant's fault. And by the way, I would say the first, I think, political thing that I've ever really cared about was I was really, really pro minimum wage laws when I was 14. Now, the first job I ever had when I was 14, I worked at this coffee shop bagel store, and there were all these just Mexican dudes who worked there, and I made I think I made $4 an hour, and we were all off the books, and all of them they might have made $6 an hour, but they were adults, they were grown-ups, and I was 14, and these guys the work sucked, and I remember just sitting there, and I loved the guys, I got to know a bunch of them, and I really liked them a lot. They were good dudes. And I remember being this is so fucked up. There should be, they should really have a minimum wage. And then, of course, as I got older, I realized, there is a minimum wage. And this is just off the books and it doesn't matter. And then I also, as I got older and realized, learned something about economics, I realized that, actually, if you enforce the minimum wage, you would just basically take away the best weapon that they have, which is that they're willing to work for less, and that's why they'll get hired and all this. But regardless, and I love those guys, and I agree that there's a lot of these immigrants coming over here. It's not like they did anything wrong, but that to me again isn't really the question. In the same way that if 5 really destitute immigrants showed up outside of my front door tonight and said, "Hey, can we come live in your house, or can we come stay in your house for a while because we really have nowhere else to go?" I wouldn't say, it's their fault. that
Right.
like you guys are such bad people and that's why you're out there and I'm in here. It's like, no, look, by the grace of God, I'm here and you're there. But the answer is no, you can't come in because this house is for my family. And yes, by the way, I've got a couple extra rooms, but I'm still not letting you in because I don't know who you are. And my number one priority in life is protecting my wife and kids. Yeah. Now, now you guys want to talk about what we're going to do when you come in? Okay. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, so it's not, it's a false binary. It's not that I think it's their fault or that they did anything wrong. My point is that the people, the property owners, if you're a libertarian, the correct position is that the property owners are supposed to get to decide. And whether you agree with that or not, and by the way, there's a lot of like look, you could spin that situation to be like, I'm this big bad asshole that I won't let these people in. I have extra rooms in my house, like I could let them in, but I'm so concerned with the protection of my wife and children that I'm not going to let them in, because that's like the most important thing to me. So regardless, it doesn't matter from the libertarian perspective. From the libertarian perspective, it's like, it's my house, so I can decide who comes and who doesn't. And when you've when you've expropriated all of this money from the domestic population, and now it's this called what's called government property. Okay, yes, it's a little bit more difficult to parse out, but still I think to some degree it should be up to the people of that country, more so than up to the government officials, what they decide here. We got homeless people basically at our doorstep. It's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? I don't think we should let none of them in, but all of them, like I don't know, that seems a little unreasonable too. I mean, take this like to its, you asked me if I wanted to ask you guys questions, but like people love to reducto absurdum my position here, but do it to the open borders position. I mean, let's say that the craziest hypothetical you can think of, like, let's say that Pakistan threatens to nuke India, and they're going to do it, and 500 million Indians show up on our doorstep. Do we just have to let them in under current situations? And we live in a democracy, and they all get to vote, and they all get to move in here, and you know what? This is now, your country is going to be drastically different. Like, every inch of your culture and traditions and norms is over, because you are now just you're up against a dominant majority. Is there no right of like the people who live in this country to say like, okay, we'll take a few million, but not 500 million, like,
well, that would kind of also happen a bit naturally. Like, there's just not.
Can I say, like,
you go ahead.
Like, I'm not a philosophy dork. I'm not going to.
I'll debate that.
Like, they're not, the logistics of getting those people here make my head hurt.
Sure. Like, but I'm not. I get that's impractical. I'm just saying, like, is there a level?
And I feel you though. Like, I would say at that point, I go, not open borders. So like I'm not one that's like, we got to have this black and white open borders, closed border conversation. And I think it's an unhealthy conversation for the liberty movement to have.
Sure, but that's my point. Is basically like, and that's really the point of these like kind of reductionist arguments, or like taking them to the logical extreme. I get it. That's the point.
And that's kind of what,
at a certain point you'd go, okay, yeah. So it doesn't work there. Okay, so then where are like it doesn't disprove your argument. It doesn't.
And that's kind of where we wanted to have this this podcast. It's like, we're not the guys that paint you like that. We're not.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I get that completely.
I
totally get that vibe.
We kind of want to get down.
That's the point. Look, if you were to say, hey, I think like being really well hydrated is like a good, a good choice for your lifestyle. And I went, well, if you drank 17 million gallons of water, you would die. You'd go like, yes, okay, well, okay. But that doesn't disprove that being well hydrated is a good thing. So it's not that disproves that. It's just that it makes you start to wonder, okay, so there is a point where this becomes a problem. Where exactly is that point? And
so you said 500
my argument, right, and that's just an extreme to paint an example. Right. But my point is that what we're dealing with right now is a problem. And you can see it all throughout the country. And you can particularly see it in areas where there's intensely high immigration concentrations, that there is a real problem with the hundreds of thousands of people who are coming over the border monthly, and that this is not it's not a libertarian outcome, and it's not an outcome that's conducive toward moving us in a libertarian direction. It's only going to, like, that's essentially my main point, that it's only going to move us in the wrong direction.
So if it's okay, I'm going to say some things, then I'll leave it to Will, and then we'll leave it to Derek.
Sounds good.
All right.
That's a good moderator.
I'm sorry. Okay, so the 500 million people. So if they have a right to come to our country, if we agree that it's voluntary, which we didn't agree on, but if we did agree on, then we just saved 500 million lives with freedom, basically.
Right.
It would suck, obviously. It's going to suck that their whole country got bombed. Like, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it from it's going to suck from the native perspective, but it's also going to suck. It's going to suck a lot less from the Indians that get to live, I guess. So it does kind of depend on if we agree that whether or not they have a right to immigrate or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just, my immediate response to that, and I want to hear everyone's point, but I go, yeah, I mean, if you taxed, if I took everything all you guys have and sent it to Africa, it would be a lot better for those people, and it would suck for you guys. But that's not, like, to me, that's not really the libertarian answer. It's like, who has a right to that, money is really more of the question. So yeah, I agree. Right. It'd be better for them. No one's arguing that. I'm certainly, like, I agree. And it'd be better for those homeless people or whoever if I let them sleep in my house.
Yeah,
but I'm not going to.
Yeah. I had two other points. What were they?
Sorry.
No, you're perfectly fine.
You'll remember them as soon as Will starts talking. Will?
Yeah. Let me start a point, and then it'll come right to you, brother.
Right.
So, like Dave, I just want to kind of try to kind of us flesh out this idea that I have, and if I could be being a retard, I don't know, but I feel like we are all more open borders, not like shut it down tomorrow and all this kind of ultimatum, but just decreasing border security that is out of control as far as the federal government spending and etc. And then within the border security that does exist, allowing more people to come in without the federal government monitoring their actions in here and their interactions with Americans like myself, a farmer, that the blueberry industry does kind of rely on migrant labor. And now we've just set up a system to where the government ships us in people, takes a shit pile of taxes out of everything and ships them back. There's even stories where here in Georgia, there were farmers or people that were sexually assaulting Mexican labor and holding guns on them and stuff and threatening them. And then it was just like a phone call, and the federal government just dumped them right back on the border. Just kind of we're setting up a system, or not we, but the government is setting up a system where people are abused like they do with everything. Yeah. And I think of conservatives, when they are worried about their culture and we're worried about things like that, we allow the state to come in and take over that job, to where maybe we should be, instead of ceding the argument to conservatives that there is a problem that has to be handled with, the tough hands of dudes with guns. Maybe we could talk about hey, let's pass legislation to where immigrants just don't get benefits. And maybe they do benefit in the emergency room or something, but we can set up a way to where they can pay their fair share.
Well, that's kind of, I agree with that in spirit. the issue I think that you have is that because even there you had to say, well, not in emergency rooms, right?
No,
Because
I'm fine with.
the
I don't
problem,
really care. Like,
but
I
the
really
problem
like if
is
it's an
that
American. I deal with poor
the
Americans too.
problem is that we live in an advanced enough society, and unfortunately, it's so controlled by like statism that there's just no way anyone's going to tolerate a system where it's legal to turn someone away from a hospital, or where it's legal to say, hey, you don't have to go to this school.
Well, that's
Like there's
something
just
like we can
there's just
incorporate.
no way that, yes, we will, but that's the reality of it, is that it's like if somebody is sick and we're just not going to tolerate them not getting like healthcare. I mean, I'm not saying like we'll tolerate like you being bankrupted from your health insurance or whatever bullshit Obamacare insurance or something like that, but we're not going to tolerate you like, oh, you're bleeding out and no one operates on you. So look, Hans Hermann Hoppe, who is considered to be like the most right-wing, libertarian on this issue, his proposal that he had that I actually thought was kind of interesting. I mean, he certainly supports like the kind of like decentralization of immigration control, but he at one point said, well, what about if we just said, hey, we have almost like in a sense open borders for any sponsored immigrant, meaning which there are some sponsorship elements to our immigration policy and those of lots of other
And
countries.
that's what I'm
But
kind of.
if they go, hey, if you take full financial responsibility for somebody who's coming over here, meaning that like you basically take out, like you're the insurance policy on whatever externalities they may cause, like whatever, or they may incur on the taxpayer. It's not on the taxpayer, it's on you. So if you were to say, hey, if so, like I invite someone onto my property, I invite them to come work for me or whatever, they have an apartment rented or they have a house rented or something like that, and I'm responsible for any like healthcare, education costs that they incur, then they have a right to come here.
Can I say
that anybody in the world who gets that can come here
that's
legally.
kind of the fucking problem, though. Like,
I
that's
would
what we're living
support
with.
that. I would support that 100%.
But see,
100%. Because I think that's the closest, absent like a stateless society, I think that's the closest approximation to libertarianism that you could come up with, where like, yeah, you can invite someone onto your property and no one should be able to like stand in their way, but you shouldn't be able to put those costs on the taxpayer. So like that would be, to me, that would be like a completely fair compromise.
Well, in that spirit, I think that's kind of like what the federal government has set up, like kind of a sponsorship program. And that's kind of the reality I'm like trying to describe to you. It's like, it fucking sucks. I would rather, like, as when I was a teenager, like in these years, like when we would have, and they're like, it wasn't fucking like clean or what, but a caravan of Mexicans would come. You would negotiate a price of like, hey, if y'all pick this many blueberries per hour, we can pay this. And they would negotiate with other farmers. They'd pick their blueberries. They'd figure out where they lived. They handled themselves like human beings do, and they left the area. Now it's like I'm entering into this relationship where I'm responsible for these people that I don't fucking know, but like there's blueberries to be picked. And like the more we have to handle like meth monkeys and high schoolers, them blueberries ain't getting fucking picked.
But that's very different than what like Hoppe was describing. It's not like, look, if you say like, oh, these people came in and I just had to like offer them a wage and then they would pick the blueberries, it's like fine, but then what happens when one of them gets sick? What happens when they come here and their kids need to go to school? All of those costs are now put on the taxpayer. And I'm just saying that it's like what I think would be a much better system, like this is the Hoppe proposal, is that if you were to say, and then by the way, just to be clear again, he first favors massive decentralization of all of this, but short of that if you were to say, hey, look, I will say that like if I want to invite someone here from another country, I will assume full financial responsibility for them, and will guarantee that none of this is put on the community who did not voluntarily agree for this. That I will, then I would say I'm 100% for that.
Well, what's going to happen?
That policy.
What's going to happen is me, a poor blueberry farmer, is going to go, well, fuck that. I'm not financially responsible.
Okay, but fine.
And then the bigger blueberry farmers do that and set their relationship with the government.
All right, dude, but fine. But you know what? Then you don't get to externalize those costs onto the taxpayer.
Okay, so
like that's
we could be bringing in libertarian solutions to not make them a drain on society. Like that's what I would like. That's
I'd probably support all of those. I mean,
I think you would. I know you would.
Yeah, sure.
I would like us to kind of lead with that to conservatives.
I think we should always lead with our libertarian solutions. Yeah. And I think if people if you guys you said you listen to my show or whatever, I always try to lead with libertarian solutions to these problems. Right. I completely agree with that. I think we should always be saying that, look, this is what the libertarian has to say about this.
I do say, hey,
here's where the government's fucking you over. And look at this, even with the immigration, it's like, dude, we subsidize immigration. The taxpayer is forced to subsidize immigration, and then they're also forced to subsidize the war against immigrants. It's bananas. None of this makes any sense. Let's stop all of that. Let's stop all of the things that cause all of these problems to begin with. But I'm just saying, at when it comes down to it, I don't think if you're saying well, I can afford to pay an immigrant to work a job, but I can't afford to pay them what their hospital bill is going to be and what their kid's school is going to be and what all of this is going to be. It's fine, but now that's just being forced on the taxpayer. So if you want, so then you're not really inviting them. You're invited. This is Hoppe's essential point, that because this is what people will argue with me about when they say, well, look, if someone has a job and they have an apartment, then they're invited, essentially. They're an invited person. You can't say they weren't invited here. But you're not really inviting them. You're inviting them at being subsidized by people who didn't consent to it. And that is really the essence of the libertarian question, is did everybody involved consent?
I think we're collectivizing the American people, and to that point of do they consent to everything? They probably don't consent to the drugs that we do or the guns that we have or the all these kind of libertarian things.
But I'm not asking them to pay for it.
I'm not either. I'm trying to get us as anarcho-capitalists like us and you, Dave, you are our man. You're my dude. I'm showing up to these fucking things to push you into the position to where if you decide the fucking libertarian nomination is yours. So I'm trying to bring in my perspective here on immigration to say, brother, if you could, when you are talking to Mike Cernovich, you go hey, yeah, it's okay that you're worried about these immigrants, but here's solutions that we could do to where they aren't a drain on society. Here is where we could say, hey, why don't you push your Republican dorks to make legislation where they don't vote or they don't have a system. If we get down to the point where, immigrants like hobos can just go into the emergency room and be a cost, I don't think that's something
but I don't
drastic. I'm not for it. I just
I understand. No, listen, I appreciate that, and but I think if we're being fair to Mike Cernovich, for example, I think if I were saying to him, hey, we should push these policies that make it so that immigrants can't vote, I think he'd be all for that. He'd be yes, absolutely, we should. But the issue is that they are voting, and it's very hard to push those policies. By the way, it's hard to push any of these policies. I mean, I don't think any of this is gonna work the way we want it to, short of a huge cultural revolution. Not to borrow Mao Zedong's term, but like, yeah, if I were to say to Mike Cernovich, well, how about we just have really strict ID laws or proof of citizenship laws before you can vote? Believe me, he's already on board with that. You know, he'd be way down with that.
That's where like we are just messaging here. Like the whole thing is just for messaging. And like if we are to the conservatives, like we have to make them better. We have to make them more libertarian. And 100%. If we play into their fears of immigrants changing our culture, which I think the American culture, it has suffered, you know, a lot of fucking bullshit, but I think we can take immigrants into here. And the fear of that is worse than their drain on society, especially like as far as like our messaging on like what we can do, like the monetary drain that can be handled with legislation. We're never going to write that legislation, but we can be the messengers of not being like, sure, all of your border control shit that you guys want, there is a need for it. And they're going to go right for it. Just like when you see any kind of thing about fear of Russia or China to any war hawks, they're going to go, sure, yeah, glad y'all are fiscally responsible, but we got to pay for all this bullshit.
Yeah, well, okay, so I agree with that. I think you're right about that, and I think that the role of the libertarian is to always be pointing out how the state apparatus has created and exacerbated the crisis that we're in. So I agree with what you're saying there.
And I know you do. I just wanted to like get you on tape saying like you are more open borders than Joe Biden.
I don't know.
Just say it. But then like we bully them conservative dorks into being real. Like Ron Paul.
I don't
Ron
really
Paul would support this, wouldn't he? Like
no, I don't think Ron Paul would say he's more open borders. He doesn't
support
than Joe
the
Biden.
philosophical open borders circle jerk that we're having, but like talking about abolishing ICE and all this shit.
Abolish the entire Department of Homeland Security.
That's what I'm getting at. But
that's
more open borders.
Ron Paul also said to put the military on the border. You know,
which
I'm not completely against. It'd be better than if you could say, hey, bring the entire military home from all around the world, the 130 some odd countries where we have military members stationed, and put them on our border, and our military just protects our country. That would be a huge improvement over what we have right now. I'd be fine with that.
Did you see Lauren Boebert say, "Don't send tanks to Ukraine, put them on the border"?
Yeah.
I know that's a little tongue in cheek, but. They are ready.
I'm not. I gotta say, she's not wrong about that. It's preferable to Ukraine.
Preferable for sure. It's less dangerous for us.
Yeah,
sure. I like that.
I gotta run in a second, guys. Do you guys want to like any other questions or?
Yeah, I got the closing statement. Then hear from Derek, and then we'll let you roll. I really appreciate your time. I mean,
absolutely, guys, happy to do it.
Okay, so I was going to say, it's just with the welfare argument. You seem to make the welfare argument a lot, but like I made the point. If I gave you $1,000 every time you hugged your wife, would you still be able to hug your wife, even though the government was subsidizing it? The answer is, of course, yes. So I don't think that's an argument against immigration, and I don't think it should be used as an argument against immigration. The other thing is, you make the popular argument, but, we kind of agreed that it has to be what is in Capistan, or what's most like the free market. I think we kind of agreed there, although we might have disagreed on what Ancapistan would look like if we'd actually have a line between, say the United States and Mexico versus just these bunch of tiny little communities. I think the biggest disagreement we had was just on culture. What it would do to our culture. And I guess, I didn't make a great point, I guess. So you're giving me stuff to think about. But, I think of, I'm Irish and German. Derek is unknown mutt. We think of like all the different cultures that came together to make America, whether it's, it's one of the freest countries. It's one of the best countries. It's also one of the worst countries in a lot of ways in terms of foreign policy and whatnot. But I look at, we kind of all agree that there's like a cultural decline. And yeah, I mean, I could say like maybe people from Honduras wouldn't be a better culture, but like maybe they would. Like they're just a poor country and they're filled with violence, so they're just reacting to that. Like if they immigrated here, it might be totally different. So I guess that's my closing statements, and then I'll kind of shut up from there. But appreciate you, Dave. Big fan, and yeah.
Well, thank you guys all. Thank you so much for having me on. I guess so if the if my the question of if me and my wife were I was given $1,000 every time I hugged my wife or something like that. I don't know. It's if that was happening and the people in my community were forced to give me that money. Well, certainly I don't think they could dictate. I don't think it would be just to say they could dictate how many times I hug my wife or something like that. But if they could, if they said like, okay, we're giving you this $1,000, but we dictate that you can't spend it on, you can't just gamble it away. You have to spend it on your wife and kids. I don't know. There's some things that could seem somewhat reasonable about that. Again, it's not perfect, but they shouldn't be forced to kind of give me that money to begin with. So that's really the perfect scenario, is that they shouldn't be forced. And again, like with all of this stuff, you can find, I know there's a lot of people I've heard who have argued against my immigration policy. They go, well, okay, well, you're saying that the population should get to decide what, who can drive on public roads. Well, what if they decided that the unvaccinated couldn't be drive on public roads? You're like, yeah, you're right. That'd be fucked up. And like, I would not support that. And that would be, because that would kind of entail forcing me to put something into my body and violating my self-ownership. And yeah, I don't agree with that. But also, if you take the extreme opposite, like if you do a reductio absurdum to the opposite side, you'd go, okay, well, are you saying there should be no restrictions on public property? Are you saying that there should be no restrictions ever, where if you go like, well, again, like the examples I've used before, a crackhead going to a public school or something like that. Like if you go, well, they have to be allowed in because it's a non-violent person who has not initiated violence against anyone else. They haven't violated the NAP and it's government property. That's also kind of absurd. So the answer has to be almost somewhere in the middle, where you go like, yeah, there's unfortunately in this situation with a government, there is some middle ground where on government property, as we kind of agreed earlier, we'd like them to not exist. But short of not existing, we'd like them to exist closer to what a libertarian society would look like. And that, to me, would not be hundreds of thousands of border apprehensions every month. We don't even know how many people are actually coming in every month. And this to me is not the scenario that you would have under a libertarian society. So I guess that's where I'd leave off that.
All right. Any final thoughts, Derek?
No speaking English. I do not understand your argument. Tell Lewis, I'm coming for his job.
Yeah, you gave me a lot to think about, so I really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate all you guys having me on. I'd love to do this again sometime. Thank you guys very much, and I appreciate all the support and all the kind words and stuff. And I really love these these conversations about advanced applied libertarian theory.
Yeah. Yep, a little nerdy, but totally fun. I love it. All right. Yeah, so if everyone sticks around, Dave, I know you got to run. Thanks for coming. But I think we're going to have Pod Review jump on, and we're going to review the debate and just kind of go nuts, have a party.
That's when we're going to get our courage.
You better have my back, you son of a bitch.
No, we're going to get our courage, and we're going to talk so much shit. So Dave wouldn't listen to us. And then you're going to review that on your podcast.
Hell yeah.
And then we're going to get really meta about it. This will just cycle into, something.
By the way, Will's trying to act like a fan. Like, I totally came to Reno to support you. He was high as hell and didn't even go to the room to vote.
Dave, do you remember meeting me, Dave? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
No, it's okay. You meet everybody. It's fine. I feel bad because like you were meeting a child, like a woman and her child, and I was sneaking around the corner. I was smoking a joint. And I was like, oh fuck, Dave Smith, and he's talking to a child, and I'm just sitting here like.
But you know,
Will
it's a very libertarian moment, if nothing else.
It was.
It's such a presidential thing to be kissing babies. You know what I mean?
I know he was already on it until he
trying my best.
Until he decides.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Have a good night, fellas.
Yeah.
Justin Amash 2024.
All right. We are